justice is a higher calling. Charity may be voluntary. Justice strikes me as being obligatory. I feel very strongly that we have to upgrade our sense of duty. I think this has to be understood as a moral obligation. And the moral obligation, I feel very strongly, will compel us to do more. It will compel us to think more deeply and to act with more resolve. And that resolve has to inform our analysis and at the same time produce the kind of results that we claim we wish to see happen. And so we shouldn't kid ourselves about how challenging this is. And we shouldn't demean or trivialize a sense of charity, a sense of benevolence. But it has to be an obligation, a duty, a responsibility that is more non-negotiable than not. Otherwise, it just becomes a discretionary consideration. I think we have to move beyond that in order to make a real big difference.
How do you get everybody on the same page with moral obligation? You know, with a crisis like homelessness, you know, I think we spoke about it before, how sometimes people shudder because they look at a fellow human who's unhoused and they think, well, that could be me. Sometimes they shudder because there's this judgment or idea that, well, you did that to yourself. Why or how did you get there? So, you know, I think for moral obligation for it to resonate with us, we have to recognize community.
Yes, I think moral obligation arises out of community. It's not an isolate set of concerns that we should have. They ought to be holistic. They ought to be not simply community-based, but community-informed and enhanced. And so when we think about this issue of servant leadership, it posits the assumption that the work that we choose to do is not simply because we expect to have a good time.
Sure.
In other words, this is not for the faint of heart. This is duty bound. And to the extent that that is the case, it has to be a part of the public policy discourse that informs how we work on this issue. That's what servant leadership means to me. It has robust implications for moral obligation without being moralistic, without evangelizing, as it were, without proselytizing. It is essentially to cause people to live up to making the communities of which we are a part better. And frankly, Rhea, I believe that it is not a a question of ignoring self-interest.
Okay.
In other words, it is perfectly understandable and fine for us to help others, in part because we know there's a benefit to ourselves in doing so, and not simply or exclusively spiritual,
Sure.
but in fact material. So our environment is enhanced. And so this is not a conversation that's ethereal in any sense. This is, in fact, what happens in your neighborhood, on your block.
Right.
The moral discourse to which I'm speaking has to inform that it can, it should, it must. That's what servant leadership is about. It is about insisting that there's a sacrifice that we anticipate.
Sure.
And it could pull on our hearts as well as on our wallets. It can pull on whatever we have to give to make the situation and all the circumstances better, to elevate the lives of individuals who are located in circumstances that are not only undignified but unspeakable.
Absolutely. And, I think this also really resonates that when we think about moral obligation and community, in the word community, there's unity.
Right.
In unity, there's you and I.
Right.
So, no, there really is nothing as selfless because everything starts with the self. But when we think about that, when we think about community, unity, moral obligation, servant leadership, during a time like the holidays, we are, perhaps it's enculturated in us or we're moved to because of what the holidays mean, whether it's a religious perspective, a community perspective, a climate perspective, whatever it may be, that we have a greater sense of giving and this idea of charity that sometimes I think can conflict with justice or it can support the idea of justice. How do we carry this? How do we resolve from a place of servant leadership the sometimes conundrum of charity and justice?
I don't think they are necessarily dichotomous.
Okay.
I do think justice is a higher calling. Charity may be voluntary. Justice strikes me as being obligatory. If I think about that in the context of community, the etymology of the term is to build up rather than to tear down. And so when we think about community, we're thinking about building people up. Now, there is a charitable dimension of that.
Sure.
Because you get to charity before you get to obligation, but obligation has to be on the way, because if it becomes discretionary, you will do other things with, let me just say it in these terms, public resources. That's why the policy making has to have moral content that essentially compels people to do what ought to be done to elevate the lives of those who are yet homeless. That's why we make the assertion there has to be a right to housing. Not an option,
Right.
but everyone deserves a roof, a door, not a bench, but a roof, a door, a bed.
Yep.
And the right to housing, not a new concept, but a concept that is tough for governments to get their arms around, because the cost is not insignificant when you think about it in traditional terms. But when you think about the cost that attaches to the lives of people who are suffering on a daily basis, and families that are attached to it, and the circumstances of women who are on the street attributable to domestic violence, and those who are suffering as a result of substance use, et cetera, et cetera. There are costs, and not simply moral costs, but there are economic consequences related to that as well. And it seems to me that a servant leadership understanding of what we must do in this moment, in this hour, is critically important for us to get our heads around and work through that. We have to do it, otherwise I suspect we will not make the progress that I think we are obliged to make.
What can or should I do, or as an Angelino, to further understand what you just shared about the landscape and systems and to be part of a solution that
Well, I know one venue,
Okay.
Rhea Mac chairs the Empowerment Congress Homeless Working Committee every other week on Thursdays,
Yep.
first and third Thursdays.
Some may say the second and fourth, but yes.
Right. Thanks for the assist.
You're welcome.
There's a lot to know and there's a lot to learn here.
Yes.
And I think we have to keep learning, keep studying. It's not static, it is dynamic. But the status quo, I will declare,